Tonight, we're going to be talking about something that isn't always easy for me. Is that working? Maybe it's working. Can everybody hear me? Okay. It's not something that's always easy for me. And I know it's the same with a lot of you guys. And it's something that I experience a lot here in the last couple years. And that's change. And what change does, guys, is it makes this really, really difficult for us to be consistent and to be solid in whatever approach that we're taking to do whatever we're doing. And obviously in the last couple of years, I've moved from my hometown. I started a new career. I moved into my house for the first house I've ever had on my own. I got married. That's a pretty big one. If you guys didn't know, getting married is a huge, huge deal, okay? So I've experienced a lot of change in my life, a lot of change. And even with my family, with a lot of things that have gone on in my family, there's been a lot of change for me, especially the last 2 or 3 years. My life is nothing compared to what it was 3 years ago. Everything about my life, everything about where I'm at and what I'm doing in my family, and just so many different things. There's so much change in my life. And that's very difficult for me a lot of times because I'm the kind of person that's not very consistent and organized in the first place, okay? I'm not very organized. I'm not very good at keeping things together. So when my environment is like that as well, it's even harder, it's even tougher for me to stay consistent and to stay in a solid foundational area, solid foundational type of mindset. So tonight what we're going to be talking about is good change. And it's something that happened, a few things that happened, that is really, really good change. And what that is the idea that Jesus changes everything. That's the sermon title tonight, is Jesus changes everything. And everything is not limited to just those things that we're comfortable with. Everything isn't limited to the things that are easy for us. Everything isn't limited to our conveniences and what's going to be easiest for us, or what's going to be most comfortable for us, or what's going to be the easiest thing for us. Jesus changes everything. Jesus changes every single thing in our life. And even 2,000 years ago when Jesus walks this earth, you think about how big of an impact Jesus had on his area that he lived, in his area where he ministered and performed miracles and did all the crazy things that he did. Jesus changed that region of the world forever and ever and ever. There's still feuds, there's still wars over land that are going on today because of what Jesus did while he was here. And obviously that was never God's intention. I'm not saying that Jesus came to make a lot of people uncomfortable and to make people fight over places. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is Jesus changes everything. And he did change everything even thousands of years ago. I remember a couple months ago, I was on my way back. It was probably a month ago, actually, not too long ago. I was on my way back from somewhere, and Emily texted me, and she was like, "I have a surprise when you get home." I was like, "Oh no, this is not going to be good." I was like, "Okay, what did you do?" So I walk in, and she's sitting there with the biggest grin on her face. I'm like, well, "What's going on?" So I'm a very, very consistent person, as I said before. And I walk into my bedroom to put some dirty clothes in the hamper or something. And I went to throw it in the hamper, and it's over there, and our bed is on this wall now, and the TV's over here, and my clothes are all rearranged. And it was crazy because it's something I was not expecting. I just sat there and stared at it for a second. I was like, okay, I need to really, really breathe deeply right here, because it was so overwhelming because of the change. And that's exactly how Jesus was to so many people. But for us, guys, the changes that Jesus made is crucial to our faith. The changes that Jesus made makes it everything for our salvation. In John chapter 1, verse 1, this is where we're going to start. We know this verse very well. But starting in John chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Verse 2, I love this verse, guys. I love verse 2 because a lot of times we read verse 1, and verse 1 can be very, very confusing for so many of us. But then in verse 2, it literally kind of summarizes what verse 1 is saying. It says, He was in the beginning with God. So in verse 1, we have the Word, which was in the beginning, which is the same beginning that it talks about in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the same place that Jesus was in the beginning, when the earth was void and empty and nothing came into being through him, and apart from him, not even one thing came into being that has come into being. Just like we said, Jesus changes everything. And every single thing that has ever came into being is because of Jesus Christ. In him was life, and the life was the light of mankind, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not grasp it. Going down to verse 14, after it tells us about John the Baptist, how he's supposed to come and prepare the way for Jesus. Verse 14, Then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. That's our first point tonight. The law was given, or that's our second point. Jesus changes everything by becoming flesh. In verse 14, or in verse 14, our number one point, the law was given to Moses. Grace and truth were realized through Christ. So when you think about verse 14 and you think about how the world was before Jesus Christ, when you think about how God's people lived their life before Christ, when you think about the things that they did before Christ, here in John chapter 1, verse 14, it says, And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And then in 15, it says, John testified about him and called out, saying, This was he of whom I said, He who is coming after me has proved to be my superior, because he existed before me. Before of his fullness, we have all received, and grace upon grace. And here's our first point in 17. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. God, the only Son who is in the arms of the Father, is explained to him. So you think about verse 17, guys. The law was given to Moses. Grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. When you think about that statement, when you think about that idea, the law was given through Moses. Everything that we were supposed to do to keep God's commandments, to stay even halfway right with God, all the crazy things that we had to do to stay right with God was through the law. And when you think about the law and you think about its imperfections and how there was no atonement for our sin, when you think about how there was no atonement for our mess ups and our mistakes, and the disastrous nature that we would become. But there was no fixing me and you. There wasn't any taking care of our sin problem that was started in the very beginning in the garden. And we know that Adam and Eve, they made a decision. They made a choice that would forever make it impossible for us to follow the law. Because they lost their innocence. They lost their purity. They lost their close connection walking with God. And ever since then, I know Chase said this the other day, and I think it's such an awesome picture, is that when they lost that moment, when they lost the purity of God, when they lost that walking with God every single day, and they had to leave the garden, God has been doing everything he can to bring us back. And the number one thing, guys, that Jesus changes, he changes everything. But guys, the number one thing is that the law was given to Moses, and grace and truth was changed forever by Jesus Christ at Calvary. When you think about the law, you think about the things that the Israelites had to do. You think about the sacrificial system. You think about all the ways that God tried and pleaded with them to stay with him and to stay together and to walk by his side and to just do what he asked them to do. You think about all the things that they tried to do, and it was never, ever enough. Because here's the reality. The wages of sin, the cost of sin, the greatness of sin is not an easy debt to pay. And it's a debt that me and you could never, ever pay. It's a debt that me and you could never tackle. It's a debt that me and you could never, ever, ever begin to comprehend. But Jesus changed everything, because now, since Jesus died on the cross and he was rose for our salvation, now we have grace and truth. Just as it says in verse 17, for the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. And then in verse 14, I skipped around this because I wanted to hit that point first. And now we're going to come back to verse 14 in John chapter 1. It says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. The number 2 way we're going to talk about tonight that Jesus changed everything is by becoming flesh. I've said this before, I think, in a Devo, but I think what's so significant about the Jesus story. I know it's Christmas time and so many people are thinking about Jesus and they have Jesus on the forefront of their mind. Even people who may never think about Jesus throughout the year, they're thinking about him right now. And that's what I love about Christmas. And we can go the route of saying, well, I hate that they're only thinking about him once or twice a year. But in my mind, it's like, praise God that he made a holiday that they would think about him twice a year or once a year. I think it's a glass half full type of mentality. Yes, I do wish they would continue to meet together and continue to take the Lord's Supper, but I'm also so glad that they get to meet Jesus this month, that they get to be there this month. So you think about Jesus becoming flesh. You think about the Jesus story, that Jesus was born to a virgin, that Jesus came to this earth the son of a carpenter, that Jesus came to this earth not a glorious, wonderful king, but as a poor man, as someone low in society, as someone who wouldn't always have a place to lay their head, as someone who would be rejected by their community and their town. But Jesus became that superhero for all of us. And here's the difference in every superhero story that's ever been. You think about Spider-Man or Batman or any of those crazy superheroes that we love to talk about, right? Mostly all of them. Peter Parker's my favorite. I don't know about you guys, but you think about Peter Parker. He was a nerd. He wasn't important in his school. He wasn't anything. He was the lowest of the lows. And he became someone who would reach every mountaintop that he wanted. That he would conquer so many different things, that he would become so many things that nobody ever thought he would be. But he came from the valley, the lowest of lows, and he reached the mountaintop. Family, our Jesus Christ is the complete opposite. Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, like my Devo the other day when we talk about Psalm 8, how every single thing in our universe, everything that's being created or will be created is because of Jesus Christ. And he came from the mountaintop and came down to the valley to walk with people like me and you. Unlike any superhero story that I've ever heard of. Maybe you guys have one. But every superhero story usually comes from someone who's not a very big deal, an underdog story. We all love an underdog story, don't we? We all love an underdog story. We all love someone coming down from the lowest of lows and becoming some high thing. But when we think of Jesus, he come from the very greatest place there is of safety and of comfort at the right hand of God. And he came to walk on this earth with me and you. That's how Jesus changed everything. That's how Jesus changed everything that was before him and everything that would be after him is he took on flesh and he became a man like me and you and lived a perfect life that we can never, ever, ever even hope or dream to live. That's how Jesus changes everything. Number 3, Jesus changed societal views on political boundaries. When we think about the political boundaries at this time, when we think about the difference in Jew and Gentile, when we think about the difference in Jew and Samaritan, let's turn to John chapter 4. When we think about Jesus and the woman at the well, I know we all know the story fairly well, but when you think about Jesus and the woman at the well, the societal view, the political boundaries that Jesus had to cross to talk to this woman was greater than we can probably imagine. It was a bigger deal than we can probably think that it was. Okay? The reality that Jesus would ever even speak to this lady is crazy. Because he was a Jewish man and she was a Samaritan woman. Not only was she a Samaritan, but we know she was a Samaritan woman. And the idea that Jesus would even speak to her, a Jewish man would even speak to her, is crazy. And he doesn't just speak to her, but he asks her for something. He crossed political boundaries. He crossed societal views. He changed everything about how the world felt, about how the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees, all the really important people, Jesus changed the way that everyone would feel about societal and political issues. Starting in verse 7, a woman of Samaria came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away to the city to buy food. So the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, though you are a Jew, are asking me for a drink, though I am a Samaritan woman?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus changed societal views on political boundaries. And the last thing we're going to talk about is Jesus changed the separation we have because of our sin. I don't know if you guys ever have thought about this in this passage, but I kind of want to look at it a little bit different way in John chapter 4. What Jesus is doing here is he's taking the separation away from him and this Samaritan woman. Because the Jews thought so poorly of the Samaritans. They thought so horribly of the Samaritans that they didn't want anything to do with them. They didn't want to talk to them. They didn't want to be around them. They didn't want them in their towns. They didn't want to associate with them at all. But Jesus removed that separation. He removed that boundary in John chapter 4. Starting in verse 10, it says, Jesus replied to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." She said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket and the well is deep. Where then do you get this living water? You are not greater than our father Jacob, are you, who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle?" Jesus answered and said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never be thirsty. But the water that I will give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up to eternal life." So back to the first point, guys, is the law was given to Moses. We know that Moses received the law and that Jesus Christ introduced grace and truth, just as it tells us in John chapter 1. And you think about the separation. You think about the separation that we caused ourselves to have between us and God. I hate when people ask the question. I know that you guys have probably been in these types of conversations. But when people ask the question, if God really loves me, if he really cares about me, if he really wants me to be with him, if he really wants me to be in heaven, then why would he ever send me to hell? And that's a hard conversation to have. And it's not an easy way to go about it. But guys, here's the truth of the matter, is that Jesus Christ didn't cause Adam and Eve to leave the garden. And he's not going to cause us to go to hell. Jesus Christ is the separation that we have, or before Jesus Christ, there was a separation that we had between us and our deeds and the things that we did and all the laws that we wanted to upkeep and all the things that we were trying to do. But there was a chasm that separated us, and that was our sin. But when you think about the garden and you think about us today, God didn't force them to make the decision that they made. He didn't want them to leave the garden. He didn't want them to leave. He didn't want them to walk on their own and to do the things that they were going to do outside of his little safe area. But they chose to eat of the tree. They chose to sin. They chose to do what God told them not to do. And just like us, when we experience things in our life, when we wander away from God, and the people that ask that question, why would God send anyone to hell if he really, really, really loves us? The answer is God isn't going to send anyone to hell. We're the ones that make the decision to go there or to go there. And it's not God that wants us to perish. It's not God that wants us to be separated from him for eternity. It's our fleshly desires, and it's Satan that works in the heart of every single person who has ever existed. So when you think about these four ideas, the fact that, number one, the law was given to Moses. The law was given to Moses, but Jesus changed that. He changed the view of law. He changed the view of keeping commandments because grace and truth were realized through him. And number two, Jesus changed everything by leaving his heavenly home at the right hand of God and coming down to walk with little people, with nothing people like me and you. Just like Psalm chapter 8 says when it says, what is man that you think of us? What is man that you think of us? We're so little and you're so great. Why do you think of us? But Jesus left that heavenly home, and he came to this earth to live a life that we couldn't live and die a death that we deserve to die, and then come down off that cross and raise like we could never, ever do. And then number three, Jesus changed societal boundaries. He changed political boundaries, and Jesus changed the separation we have because of our sin. Just like he took the separation away with the woman at the well, because there was a huge separation between him and the woman. But he took that away because he wanted her to receive that water, that living water, that she would never become thirsty again. If you feel like this evening that you've been drinking from a well, you've been partaking in things that never, ever, ever fills up. Because guys, you can have this big empty hole and you can throw a lot of stuff in it. You can throw money, you can throw fame, you can throw friends, you can throw family, you can throw success and your job and everything that you want to throw in that hole. It will never, ever, ever fill up. It's like the woman he's talking about where she's trying to get this water and she's trying to drink, but she will never become full. She'll become thirsty again. That's just like the world, guys. It's just like the earthly things that we have. It's just like our fleshly desires. Is that if you want to feel good for a day, go play golf, right? You want to feel good for a month? Then buy a new car. If you want to feel good in whatever it is, go get something, and it'll make you feel good for a while. But it's like the water from this well. It will forever, ever, ever leave you coming back for more. If you need some of the water that Jesus is trying to give this woman in John chapter 4, it will never, ever, ever leave you thirsty. It will never dry up. It will never go away. And it's always, always available to you. If anyone here tonight, guys, if you need something that has to do with that, if you need something from the church that says, you know what, I can't do this on my own anymore, and I need Jesus to change every single thing in my life. If you need something like that, this is the place to do it. You won't be judged. You won't be looked at with bad eyes. You won't be mistreated, because that's what the world does. The people in this room aren't going to do that. We're going to love you. We're going to help you in any way you can. If there's any need at all this evening, come as we stand and as we sing.